The lion and the lamb, the lover and the fighter. We tend to think of them as distinct. It's either one or the other. But author John Lovell says to strive to be both and become a warrior poet.
Former Army Ranger John Lovell is the founder of the Warrior Poet Society, a grassroots community of like-minded men. The group's values are physical protection, the pursuit of truth, and living for a higher purpose than oneself. The message is resonating, as John's 100 million social media views attest. Now, with a new book, The Warrior Poet Way, John lays out 10 principles he believes provide the antidote to a lack of strong men in our modern world.
All right, John Lovell's with us now. Thanks for coming to the 700 Club, John.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
All right, I might embarrass you a little bit. I know you're not someone who brags, but Special Operations veteran, Ranger, multiple deployments overseas, right? Where'd you go? How many times?
I did Afghanistan 4 times and 1 time to Iraq, and then a bunch of other countries just lost in the mix.
Firearms trainer now.
That's one thing I do, yeah.
One thing. Okay, and you were a missionary overseas?
Correct.
All right. So one would think you go to your book publisher and say, I got a book. I would think you'd call it The Warrior Way, okay? But that's not the title. It's called The Warrior Poet Way. You're a poet? What's the poet aspect of all this?
Poet you can take as metaphorical, because a lot of dudes today aren't really leaning into things like poetry. However, I think a lot of the best stuff in life isn't the warrior stuff. It isn't the protecting. The protecting is a means to an end, but the end of itself is the enjoyment. It's the romance. It's the adventure. It's the majesty, the beauty, the awe. It's the stuff the poets know intrinsically. And so to be a full-bodied, vibrant man, you really need to camp out in both categories, or you're deficient in all.
Okay, so you've got the tough, gritty side.
Right.
Tender side, right? And you say, this is interesting, this caught my attention, because you're saying men all have that, but you say, be the most dangerous man in the room, right? Now,
Yes.
Some people are going to feel threatened by that, right? But what do you mean by it?
I'm okay with them being threatened by it. It is uncomfortable to be met with somebody who is bold and dangerous and strong and scary, especially in a very weak and effeminized world. And so I'm quite comfortable with that. But the only way to stop, for instance, bad guys with guns is good guys with guns. That's how all the active killer events are stopped. And so you want dangerous men amongst you. But the thing is dangerous men aren't dangerous to the good people. My kids don't fear me at all, nor does my wife or anyone that knows me. But I think the Taliban does. And that's an important distinction. Let us be dangerous as men. We're supposed to be.
Yeah. So a lot of American men, let's face it, they're kind of bored, maybe lethargic, right? I mean, that's why you make an interesting point. I think John Eldridge used to talk about this a little bit. Like, this is why guys get into video games, why they follow sports teams, because what is it about their nature that they need that?
Yeah, it's conquest, it's adventure. And so a lot of guys, you mentioned video games, are checking out to, find the skeleton sword and save the universe from intergalactic destruction. And they feel so accomplished, but really just looking at pixels on a screen, you're wasting your life, and it's terrible. But men just intrinsically have that desire to hunt, but it needs to be cultivated and put into action in the real world so we can serve our fellow man, keep the world safer, and be better.
Well, and I guess the problem is if they're not fulfilling that adventurer spirit, they're going to get lost in something that could be destructive to them and their family.
Exactly.
So what is this about? You're not telling men or encouraging men to be great, but good, right? What's the difference?
I think greatness is severely overrated. I think goodness is really the thing you go after. And it's just a mix of priorities, I think. There's lots of great men that were just scourges to their family, and their lives fell apart, and we revere them, heroic and famous in their own rights. But I desire more than anything to be told by God, well done, good and faithful servant. I want my life to count the most for the relationships around. I want to walk with humility and strength and mercy and love and compassion. I want to be a good man. And that tends to be a much harder endeavor than a great man. There's lots of great men, like Herod the Great and Peter the Great and all these, but there's only one good man, and that's Jesus. I'm like, let's be like the good man.
Well, so you mentioned Jesus. So how did he, I'm sure it's a longer story, but I want to know, how did he capture your heart? I mean, a big part of your book is your reverence, respect, and love for Jesus Christ.
So I wasn't really looking for Jesus, but he certainly found me, and I was kind of a tough nut to crack. And so he used great violence in a kind of a pretty fierce conversion moment. It happened on my own, right when I was going into the military. I felt like I was being unmade and put back together, all within a few-day period, but what was left from the rubble as he destroyed my old way of life was a new creation. And so I was one way before, and then I was completely different, and it stuck.
So he kind of just interceded and got involved in your life without you necessarily seeking or asking.
Correct. And that's just my experience. People draw all kinds of things from that, but I wasn't at church. I wasn't listening to a song. I wasn't feeling bad about my life. There was no pastor. There was no I had enough gospel facts imprinted in me years before that all of a sudden those could give birth later in God's appointed time of conversion. But it was a goofy type of conversion I really wasn't ready for.
What is this in your book about men needing a muse? Can you expound on that a bit?
Sure. A muse could be all kinds of different things. You know, it can be God. It can be oftentimes a wife, you know, somebody that stirs up, you know, holy fire, somebody who ignites passion, that makes a drab landscape all of a sudden burst with color in a life. And a man needs those kind of, that input of a muse. So much of being a man is loving one woman well forever. She's meant to draw us in, seduce us, and we're meant to hunt her forever and pursue her romantically, fiercely. And that's a muse. And if you find one, they can really set you free. They can really ignite. And that's the story of my wife and I of 16 years so far.
16 years, a couple of boys. What are you trying to teach your boys about being a man? I know they're on the younger side.
So I find you can teach people what you know, but you can only replicate who you are. So first and foremost, more than just sitting down at my feet and let me teach you lessons, I'm inviting them into all the things that I'm doing in my life. And so they see who their dad is and how I deal with different problems and my struggles and all that stuff. And I'm just transparent, living in front of them. But I try to teach them, in effect, the warrior poet way.
What about a guy who's watching this and he's saying, all right, John's got my attention. I can be doing more with my life, right?
Correct. Yes, you can.
But they're not in a habit yet or any consistency. Maybe they're laying around a lot. I mean, guys got all different kinds of things going on.
Sure.
Some feel an incredible amount of stress where they feel like they're not performing well, whatever. Where do they start?
Great question. Each guy needs to really kind of look at where they're at and be honest. Some of us are a little bit more warrior right out of the gate. Some of us are a bit more poet right out of the gate. What are you weak at? Well, let's work on that other thing. And I give a prescription in the book of here's some good, easy ways to start. But what I don't want to do is shame any dudes and be like, hey, you need to do all this stuff completely different and better and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, so to speak. It's not a self-help book. It's very, very practical. I've got practicums at the end of each chapter. And I really want guys to start small. Here's one little thing. Let's do just that thing right now, and let's play it out. I'm not huge on big goals, just small life habits that add up to a lot down the line.
Well, a lot of men now, I think they feel like they're just supposed to be, and it's an admirable goal, I suppose, just supposed to be nice people.
Oh.
Well, you don't think that, I suppose.
No, I completely agree. But I just find it a bit of a repulsive virtue when it's done at the expense of something more important. So, for instance, the gospel tells us speaking the truth in love. You can't have love without the truth, and the truth is going to offend people, especially when it's the gospel. You notice when we're telling the gospel throughout the New Testament, they're typically getting beaten and tortured and eventually killed, of like your words should be upsetting people. And if you get along with everyone, if everyone really likes who you are, you're just not a good follower of Jesus. You know, and so a lot of people blunt the offense of the gospel and they fail to speak important truth because they don't want to offend anyone and they don't want to be nice. And in offending and in removing the offense of the cross, you don't preach it at all.
Yeah. John, you've given men a lot to think about. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
If you know any men anywhere from 15 to about 100, you might want to get them this book. It's called The Warrior Poet Way, and it's available everywhere. John, again, thanks for being with us today.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it.